The Thranxian collective, hive-mind entities bound by a shared consciousness and encased in chitinous, insectoid bodies, prided themselves on pure, unadulterated logic. Emotions, as observed in lesser species, were deemed inefficiencies, glitches in the biological code that led to irrational decisions and wasted resources. Humanity, a relatively new species on the galactic stage, was a prime example. The Thranxians had observed them from afar, cataloguing their bizarre behaviors. Their attachment to small, furry creatures, their creation of non-functional art, their perplexing rituals surrounding death, all of it pointed to a species hopelessly mired in sentimentalism. High strategist Kalax, a towering Thranxian whose carapace was a deep, polished obsidian, reviewed the data on the species designated humans. Their societal structures are compromised by individualistic concerns. Kalax's thoughts resonated through the command deck of the hiveship Dominator. They dedicate significant resources to the comfort of the non-productive, the old, the infirm. Their military doctrines are predicated on preserving individual units, often at the cost of strategic objectives. They are, by all rational metrics, weak. The collective mind agreed. Humanity was a minor species, technologically several centuries behind the Thranxians, occupying a single star system and a few fledgling colonies. One such colony, Haven, on Proxima Centauri b, was situated in a system rich with tellurium and yttrium, elements vital for the Thranxian war machine and its perpetual logical expansion. The planet Proxima Centauri b, Kalax declared, its multiple eyes focusing on the holographic display of the terraformed world, is sparsely populated, approximately 1 million human units. Their defensive capabilities are negligible. A swift, decisive decontamination protocol will neutralize the biological presence, allowing for immediate resource extraction. The decontamination protocol was a Thranxian specialty. It was not a carpet bombing or a planetary bombardment. Those were inefficient and damaged valuable surface resources. Instead, it involved the targeted dispersal of a nanite swarm. These microscopic machines would infiltrate biological organisms, identify key neural and physiological pathways, and induce rapid, systemic shutdown. It was clean, quiet, and from the Thranxian perspective, mercifully quick. The Thranxian fleet, a swarm of geometric, dark metal ships, warped into the Proxima Centauri system. No demands were issued. No warnings were given. Such actions were considered redundant. The humans were an obstacle, and obstacles were to be removed. The ships took up orbital positions, their undersides glowing faintly as they prepared to release the nanite clouds. On Haven, life was idyllic. It was a young colony built by pioneers and dreamers. Families had put down roots, communities had blossomed. The sky was a familiar blue, the air clean. Children played in parks under the watchful eyes of their parents. Farmers tended their fields, their crops genetically engineered to thrive in the alien soil. They knew they weren't alone in the galaxy, but the vastness of space had, so far, left them in peace. The first sign of trouble was a subtle shimmer in the upper atmosphere. Then, communication networks flickered and died. Sensors, those that still worked, registered the massive Thranxian ships hanging in orbit like silent judges. Panic was immediate, but there was nowhere to run, nothing to fight with. Haven's small defense force, a handful of armed shuttles and a planetary defense cannon, were toys against such a foe. Sarah Chen, a biologist, was in her lab when the alarms blared. She rushed outside, her husband, David, a terraforming engineer already there, staring up at the sky, his face pale. Their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, clung to his leg, crying. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, though she knew. David just shook his head, pulling them both close. "Stay inside. Stay away from the windows." But it was too late. The nanites were undetectable to human senses. They drifted down, invisible, silent, carried on the gentle breeze. People began to stumble, a look of confusion on their faces. Then they collapsed. It started in the cities, then spread to the outlying farms. A cough, a brief disorientation, then stillness. Within hours, the bustling colony of Haven fell silent. High strategist Kalax monitored the data feeds. Biological neutralization at 99.9%, a subunit reported. Minimal structural damage. The decontamination is proceeding as projected. Kalax felt a flicker of what, in a lesser species, might be called satisfaction. The operation was efficient, logical. But the data was not entirely complete. One small pocket, a deep subterranean research outpost studying geothermal vents, had been shielded by a quirk of geology and its own atmospheric seals. It housed 63 scientists, engineers, and support staff. They had watched in horror on their limited external sensors as their world died above them. They had heard the panicked, then abruptly silenced, calms chatter. For 3 days they remained hidden, grief-stricken, terrified. Dr. Aris Thorne, the outpost director, a man whose family had been in the capital city, was a hollow shell. The initial shock gave way to a soul-crushing despair. They had lost everything, everyone. The Thranxians, meanwhile, began their descent. Automated landers touched down, disgorging mining machinery and processor units. They moved with cold, insectoid precision, oblivious to the silent cities and the bodies that lay within. They were there for the planet's resources, not its history. On the fourth day, something shifted in the outpost. The despair didn't lessen, but it was joined by something else, something hot and sharp. It started with Alara Vance, a young geologist whose parents and younger brother had been on a surface survey. She'd been staring at a screen displaying the Thranxian mining operations defacing a national park her family had loved. "They're just taking it," she whispered, her voice raw. "After what they did, they just move on." A technician, Marcus Cole, whose wife and newborn son were gone, slammed his fist on a console. "We can't let them. We can't just sit here and let them." It wasn't a plan for survival. It wasn't a strategy for victory. It was something else entirely. Dr. Thorne, listening to their rising, broken voices, saw it in their eyes. The raw, gaping wound of loss, now festering into a burning, all-consuming rage. He, who had lost everything, felt it too, a cold fire igniting in the pit of his stomach. "Their scanners will be looking for organized resistance," Thorne said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Military signatures, large energy outputs." He looked around at the faces in the dimly lit command center, faces streaked with tears, etched with grief, but now hardening with a new, terrible resolve. "We are not a military force. We are ghosts, and ghosts can haunt." They had little. The outpost was designed for research, not combat, but they had ingenuity. They had detailed geological surveys of the planet. They had tunneling equipment. They had industrial chemicals, power cells, and most importantly, nothing left to lose. The Thranxians first registered an anomaly when a newly established drilling rig near the southern volcanic plains suffered a catastrophic failure. It wasn't an explosion, not in the conventional sense. The ground beneath it simply gave way, swallowing the multi-ton machine into a suddenly formed chasm. Seismic sensors registered localized, directed tremors. Kalax dismissed it as geological instability. The planet was still settling. Then a Thranxian scouting drone, a sleek, silent flyer, was disabled. Its last transmission showed its optical sensors being coated with a rapidly expanding, corrosive foam that seemed to erupt from the ground. Another anomaly. The human attacks were small, insidious, and utterly illogical from the Thranxian perspective. They weren't targeting major infrastructure in a way that would cripple the mining operation overall. They were targeting individual pieces of equipment, often in ways that seemed designed for maximum disruption rather than strategic gain. A transport vehicle would have its tires melted by chemical spills. A communication relay would be silenced by a precise electromagnetic pulse from a jury-rigged scientific instrument. Kalax ordered a more thorough sweep. Ground patrols of Thranxian warrior drones were dispatched. These drones were formidable, armed with plasma projectors and shielded against most conventional attacks. The first patrol to venture near the old geothermal research zone simply vanished. Their telemetry went dead. A second patrol, larger and more heavily armed, was sent to investigate. They found the wreckage of the first patrol, not destroyed by overwhelming firepower, but dismantled piece by piece, their internal components scattered. It was meticulous, almost personal. Then the messages started, scrawled on salvaged pieces of metal left at the sites of these small acts of sabotage. Not demands, not threats of retaliation, just names, lists of names. Lily Chen, David Chen, the Miller family, Sector 7 Children's Park. KLAX processed this data. These are designations of the neutralized human units, it communicated to the collective. The surviving entities are memorializing their losses through acts of minor vandalism. It is irrational. But the minor vandalism began to escalate. The survivors, led by Thorne and driven by a collective, burning need for retribution, used their knowledge of the planet's unstable geology. They triggered controlled landslides that buried Thranxian equipment. They diverted corrosive geothermal fluids into newly dug Thranxian mining shafts, melting machinery and causing localized toxic clouds. One Thranxian ground team cornered what they thought was a lone human in a network of old mining tunnels. It was Marcus Cole. He didn't try to run. He faced them, his eyes hollow but blazing. As the Thranxians advanced, he triggered a detonator. The tunnel collapsed, taking him and the entire Thranxian squad with it. His last act was to ensure his name, and the name of his wife and son, were etched on the datapad he clutched. The Thranxians, creatures of pure logic, could not comprehend this. Why sacrifice oneself to destroy a single, replaceable squad? Why prioritize causing pain over self-preservation? Their actions are not designed to reclaim the planet. KLAX's analysis grew more troubled. They are not attempting to drive us off through sustainable attrition. Their objective appears to be punitive. The concept was alien to the Thranxian mindset. Punishment for its own sake, fueled by emotional distress. They understood culling a threat, pacifying a resistance, but this was different. This was vengeance. The humans in the outpost were dwindling. Each act of sabotage cost them. They were running out of resources, out of time, out of people, but their resolve only hardened. They knew they couldn't win. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to make the Thranxians understand what they had done. They were trying to make them hurt. Elara Vance, the geologist, used her expertise to rig a series of seismic charges deep within a network of volcanic fissures, directly beneath the Thranxians' primary processing plant, a massive, newly constructed facility vital for refining the ores. It was a suicide mission. She knew it. She had transmitted the geological data and the detonation plan to Dr. Thorne before she left. For Mom, Dad, and Ben, she'd whispered into her calm, her voice surprisingly calm. The Thranxians detected her. KLAX watched on the main view screen as a single human figure, clad in a modified environmental suit, moved through the dangerous terrain. Warrior drones were closing in. Capture the unit, KLAX ordered. We must analyze its aberrant motivational matrix. But Elara didn't let them. Just as the drones were about to reach her, she triggered the charges. The ground beneath the multi-square-kilometer processing plant buckled. Fissures cracked open, spewing magma and superheated gas. The plant, a monument to Thranxian efficiency, tore itself apart, collapsing into a fiery pit. The explosion was visible from orbit, a raw, angry wound on the face of the planet. The Thranxian collective experienced a wave of something akin to shock. The loss of the processing plant was a significant setback, but it was more than that. It was the sheer, self-destructive commitment of the act. One small, fragile human had inflicted billions of resource credits in damage and willingly paid for it with her life, purely out of, what? Grief. Spite. Dr. Thorne watched it happen from the outpost, tears streaming down his face. They were down to a dozen. He knew this was their last significant act. He looked at Sarah Chen, who had lost her husband and daughter. Her face was a mask of terrible, quiet sorrow, but her eyes glowed with a grim satisfaction. "They'll understand now," she said softly. "They have to." The Thranxians did not understand, not in the human sense, but they were beginning to perceive a pattern, a terrifyingly unpredictable variable they had not accounted for. the human capacity for incandescent rage born from loss. Kalax focused on the data. The human attacks were not random. They were often directed at symbols of Thranxian presence or at sites that had held meaning for the colonists. The messages, the names, they weren't just memorials. They were accusations. They were fuel. The final act came a week later. The remaining 12 survivors, led by Dr. Thorne, used their last functioning shuttle. It wasn't armed with weapons. It was filled with every data core, every recording, every personal log, every image of every colonist who had lived and died on Haven. They broadcast it on an open, repeating loop aimed directly at the Thranxian fleet. The sounds of children laughing, families celebrating, the everyday hum of a vibrant community, interspersed with the names of the dead, repeated like a ghostly litany. Then they piloted the shuttle on a direct collision course with the hive ship Dominator's primary sensor array. It was a gnat attacking a behemoth. The Dominator's point defenses vaporized the shuttle long before it reached its target, a meaningless gesture by Thranxian logic. But Kalax felt something new, a cold, alien dread. The broadcast, the faces, the names, combined with the relentless, suicidal attacks. It was a data point that defied all existing algorithms for sentient behavior. These humans, when pushed, did not break. They did not surrender. They burned, and they sought to pull their destroyers into the pyre with them. The human emotional response, specifically grief-induced retribution, is a tactical variable of catastrophic potential. Kalax broadcast to the entire Thranxian collective. The usually smooth, emotionless flow of the hive mind was disrupted by ripples of something like unease. Their actions are not constrained by self-preservation. They will absorb disproportionate losses to inflict psychologically disruptive damage. Their capacity for what they term vengeance is absolute. The mining operations on Haven slowed, then stopped. The Thranxian ships began to pull back. The cost-benefit analysis was no longer favorable, not in terms of resources, but in terms of confronting this madness. The planet, rich as it was now tainted by a terrifying unknown. Back on Earth, the full story of Haven's loss and its terrible, defiant end eventually trickled in through deep space listening posts that had picked up fragments of the Thranxian communications and the final, desperate broadcast from Thorne's shuttle. The grief was immeasurable, but so was a grim, nascent understanding. The Thranxians did not return to Proxima Centauri b. They classified Sector 278 Gamma, the human Sol system, and its surroundings, as a high-risk emotional variable zone. A new directive was issued throughout the Thranxian collective. Avoid direct, unprovoked mass casualty engagements with species 347, humans. Their response parameters to profound collective loss are unpredictable and strategically unsound to engage. Other species in the galactic Concord who had access to Thranxian public records noted the sudden reclassification. Whispers began to spread. Humanity, previously dismissed as fragile and overly emotional, was now viewed with a mixture of confusion, apprehension, and a strange, grudging respect. They were the species that, when hurt, didn't just cry. They cried, and then they picked up whatever rocks were at hand, lit themselves on fire, and charged screaming at the heart of their enemy, not to win, but to ensure their pain was shared. A new legend began to take root in the cold, logical corners of the galaxy. Do not make the humans grieve. You will not understand what happens next, and you will not like it. The universe had learned a new fear. The fury of a broken human heart, magnified a millionfold. Haven was lost, but its sacrifice had unknowingly forged a shield around Earth, a shield made of incomprehensible, terrifying human sorrow and rage.